Hey everyone, I hope you're doing alright. Today I've got 18 new cards to show you from the new expansion that have been released for the WitchWood. So I'll get straight into it. It's going to be a bit of a longer video today and we'll get through all those cards. So the first card I'm going to talk about today is from my favourite class, Paladin. And this has the potential to be one of the best 2-drops in the game. It's called Cathedral Gargoyle. It costs 2 mana, like I said. It has 2 attack, 2 health. And it has the battle cry of, if you're holding a dragon, gain Taunt and Divine Shield. So the reason why this has really strong potential is that Paladin used to have Shielded Minibot, which is a 2 mana 2/2. That minion was really strong because if you play it on turn 2, often you can trade it into your your opponent's 1-drop and still have a 2/2 on the board. It really was very powerful at the time. Now the difference here is you can get Taunt and Divine Shield, so it is even better. But there is quite a huge downside in that you do have to be holding a dragon to gain this effect. And at the moment, with the decks that we see Paladin playing right now, you don't really want to put dragons into the deck. Like, I would imagine that Cobalt Scalebane could go into a Paladin deck, for example, but there aren't really that many dragons that would probably enhance the Paladin decks. The other thing is that Call to Arms is one of Paladin's best cards as well, and if you play Call to Arms and you get this, it will just be a 2 mana 2/2. You'll get it onto the board as a 2/2. It's fine, but you don't get the battle cry and you don't get the Divine Shield and Taunt. But if you can make it work, it's great on turn 2 and it's great in late game as well. Playing down a 2/2 with Taunt and Divine Shield really does disrupt your opponent's turn. So it's a really good, strong card. And what I'm hoping for, I'm really hoping that we get either some neutral dragons that we can play in Paladin, or even some actual Paladin specific dragons, because I really like playing dragon decks and I'd love to try one in Paladin. So maybe it won't be this expansion. We've already seen quite a lot of cards released. Maybe it'll be in future ones, but this card's definitely one to watch because it can be extremely strong. This next card is also one which I think is pretty strong and probably see some good play. It's a common warrior weapon. It costs 2 mana, has 2 attack and 2 health. It's called Woodcutter's Axe. Now, it does have the death rattle of give +2/+1 to a random friendly rush minion. So this has a really strong potential to go into like a tempo warrior kind of deck. So you're playing it on turn 2, so you could play the weapon, use 1 charge, then on turn 3 you can also get the charge and the death rattle. So by turn 3 you could have given one of your rush minions +2/+1. Shaman has already proven that playing a 2/2 weapon actually can be pretty strong. So when the turn you're playing this on turn 2, it's not going to be a weak turn. You could possibly trade it into either your opponent's 2-drop or most likely their 1-drop as well. So it helps you to get that board control. But the death rattle suddenly makes the rush minions really strong. So we talked about before Darius Crowley, the legendary minion, not quite being strong enough. Well, if you can buff the stats by +2/+1, suddenly Darius Crowley seems really good. And the same goes for the Red Band Wasp. These are both cards which have really good effects if you can get them to survive. So giving them extra 1 health and 2 attack not only helps you remove other minions, but increases the likelihood of them surviving. So I think that has the potential to kind of really tip some of these rush cards over the edge, because the way they're statted at the moment, they seem to be statted quite weak. But if you can manage to buff them, maybe if Warrior gets some more cards along the lines of this, then we'll definitely see Rush played in Warrior. And I'd like to see that because Warrior really does need to have a new type of class, because it really wasn't very good in the last expansion. There were a few really complicated decks you could play, but I think it'd be fun to play kind of like a Rush Warrior, Rush Tempo Warrior, because the Rush effect doesn't allow you to go onto your opponent's face, so it's going to be slightly different to Pirate Warrior. It's going to be probably better to play against and more fun to play. So that's an interesting deck. I'm not sure how well it will work, but I'm looking forward to trying it out. Next up we have another warrior card. This one's epic. It's a spell. It costs 6 mana. It's called Deadly Arsenal, and what it does is it reveals a weapon from your deck and then it deals its attack from the weapon to all minions on the board. So this is effectively exactly the same as Dragon's Breath that we've seen in Mage, and that works in Mage. It's a really strong card that reveals a spell in your deck and then deals damage of that spell, the cost of that card, to all of the minions on the board. Deadly Arsenal is something that Warrior needs because they're going to be losing sleep with the fishes. There is quite a few removal options, so maybe it's not 100% necessary, but I just don't think it's going to work at the moment because you're paying 6 mana. So if you're paying 6 mana, you want it to do minimum 5 damage to all minions on the board, which means you have to run Arcanite Reaper or you have to run the Gorehowl. Now, Gorehowl dealing 7 damage to all minions for 6 mana would be excellent. I mean, that's a really strong play. But then there's the other problem of, one, you have to play Gorehowl, which is a pretty decent weapon, but doesn't see a lot of play. And 2, it has to be in your deck, so if you draw it, Deadly Arsenal's suddenly useless. If you've got a deck full of lots of weapons, it's not likely to be very strong. In Mage, you can put lots of spells into a deck and still have a viable deck, but you don't necessarily want to have too many weapons in a Warrior deck, for example. It just doesn't work because you'll often not be able to play them because you've just got too many weapons in your hand. So you would probably need to play 4 weapons at minimum, I would say. And that's kind of 2 Gorehowls and 2 Arcanite Reapers. And then you've got to hope you don't draw them before you draw Deadly Arsenal. And then you've got the issue of, do you play 2 copies of Deadly Arsenal? Because I think you would probably only want to play 1. So unfortunately, when you get cards like this which aren't reliable enough, they don't often see enough play, and maybe there'll be a new weapon which has very high attack which you'll have to play in your deck, so maybe it would work, but I think it's got too many downsides to me, and paying 6 mana, it's got to be really reliable when you play it, and unfortunately I don't think Deadly Arsenal will be. Moving on, we've got a legendary minion this time, and this one is for Druid. Unfortunately, I'll say right now, this is pretty bad. It's called Dusk Fallen Avianna, costs 5 mana, has 3 attack and 7 health, and it has the effect of, on each player's turn, the first card played costs 0. So obviously this is a bit of a meme card. It's got some huge kind of potential because when you could play a minion for 0 mana, and you know, in Hearthstone that's got so many different possibilities. It allows you to open lots of different combos because you can play a 10 mana minion and then still have 10 mana left over, for example, to do lots of other things. The problem with this card is that when you play it, it also affects your opponent, and it affects your opponent before it affects you. So when you play Dusk Fallen Avianna, that counts as your first card played. So the next card you play that turn does not cost 0. You have to wait until your next turn, and your opponent has a turn where they can play a card for 0 mana. So if you're playing Druid, for example, they could hit you with a free Ultimate Infestation, which then just puts you behind instantly, and they've still got 10 mana left over potentially to do what they want. They could remove Avianna quite easily with that, and then suddenly you don't even get the effect. So if it's not great, it's really not great. I mean, if you can cheat this out, and you can cheat it onto the board, then use it on your turn, then you could probably get some good combos. But it's got so many downsides. I think there'll be some fun decks which try and make use of this, but unfortunately I don't see the benefits of it right now. Now, continuing with the theme of bad cards, we've got this next one called Witch's Cauldron. This is a neutral epic card. It costs 3 mana, and it has 0 attack and 4 health. So when you play this onto the board, you're paying 3 mana for nothing, which instantly in Hearthstone, that's a bad idea. It does have a pretty interesting effect. After a friendly minion dies, add a random shaman spell to your hand. So this card opens up a lot of opportunities for value. So if you're playing a token deck and you've got 5 minions on the board that are quite small, you put this down, you can trade them in and get 5 shaman spells in your hand. The problem is that shaman spells aren't very good, or they can be really good, but I think on the whole of the game they're generally worse than average. And of course, you're paying 3 mana initially, and it can die very easily because it doesn't have any attack and it's only got 4 health. So the interesting part about this card is, though, that it is neutral and you can play it in any class. So that does mean that any class can get shaman spells now, and particularly I'm thinking about priest and also mage. If you put Witch's Cauldron in here, and if you're lucky enough to get an unstable evolution, you can then play Sorcerer's Apprentice or the Priest card, which reduces the elemental that reduces the cost of your cards. Suddenly you've got a 0 mana evolve, unstable evolution. So you can play that infinite amount of times on the board. until your turn runs out. So you could suddenly evolve your whole board into something incredible. So that is a pretty cool concept, but is not going to happen very often at all. Witch's Cauldron, fun card perhaps, but not a very good card. I mean, there's already Cult Master in the game, which is a 4 mana 4/2 minion that you play onto the board, and when one of your other minions dies, you draw a card. Now, drawing a card from your deck is actually better than getting a random Shaman spell, because the cards in your deck are usually ones that you want in your deck, rather than getting a random Shaman spell. And also that minion does have 4 attack and 2 health, so you can use it on the board as well. So, and it doesn't see a lot of play except in very specific decks. So I can't see Witch's Cauldron going into much either, but an interesting one. Maybe if we see some more synergies, it will be fun. So after going through those pretty bad cards, I've got a pretty good one here now. This is a rare card for Hunter. It's called Wing Blast. It costs 4 mana. And what it does is it deals 4 damage to a minion. So 4 mana deal 4 damage is pretty bad. Well, maybe not terrible, but it's lower than average, so you wouldn't want to play the card. However, it does have the effect, if a minion died this turn, the spell costs 1. Now suddenly, all of a sudden, dealing 4 damage for 1 mana is excellent. And in Hunter, I really don't think this is going to be very hard to achieve. It's not going to be hard to kill a minion or have one of your minions die and then play this for 1 mana. So extremely high tempo that will give you doing 4 damage for 1 mana. So I really like this. The only issue with it is Hunter already has Kill Command, which does 3 damage, or if you have a beast on the board, it does 5 damage. And Kill Command can also go face. This can only hit minions. So then we're going to be hitting the question of, do you want to run 2 Wing Blasts and 2 Kill Commands? Now, if you do run 4 copies, 2 of each, then Wing Blast could be used against minions, saving your Kill Command to hit your opponent's face. So that's great. But it does take up 2 extra slots in the deck. But still, I think this is a great card. I think for 1 mana dealing 4 damage, people will want to be putting this in the Hunter deck. Spell Hunter will definitely take this. So I quite like that one. So this next Hunter card I think is really interesting. It's another Hunter secret. It's epic, and it's called Rat Trap. It costs 2 mana. And the secret is, after your opponent plays 3 cards in 1 turn, you summon a 6/6 rat. So when you look at this, you're paying 2 mana and you're getting a 6/6 rat. That is really, really strong. That's like an incredible kind of stat line for the 2 mana cost that it costs to play it. The issue here is that I think it would only work against certain decks. If you're playing against a control deck, for example, it's very unlikely that they're going to be playing more than 2 cards in 1 turn. It does happen, obviously, but if they know that you've played Rat Trap, which they can work out after a few turns, then they just probably will do their best not to play 3 cards until they've got a way to deal with your 6/6. So this has some really strong uses, and it's really good against combo decks. It can be really good against aggro decks, because aggro decks don't really want to be playing 1 or 2. But it's very difficult, especially for the Hunter class, to play 2 mana to do nothing. So you're effectively playing 2 mana and then hoping that eventually your opponent will play 3 cards. And also, you're playing 2 mana you probably won't get immediately. If you played this on turn 2, it's very unlikely they'll play 3 cards on turn 3. Maybe even turn 4, maybe by turn 5 they might. And if your opponent's smart, they will just play around it until they can deal with it, because getting a 6/6 will be a big deal. It is a big deal. Especially if it can happen early. I think whether or not this card gets played will depend on what decks are really being played on the ladder. If people are playing lots and lots of aggressive decks or combo decks, then I think people will put Rat Trap in as kind of like a tech card. So like Galactic Crawler, for example, is a very strong tech card. So maybe people will start putting Rat Traps in to counter other decks. But just to standardly put it in your deck, I don't think this is good enough. I think it's too easy for your opponent to play around, and also it's too slow the turn that you play it. Now we're going to take a look at a priest card, a rare priest card that costs 5 mana. It's called Holy Water. Now this deals 4 damage to a minion, so you can't go face, just to minions. And if you kill the minion, you add a copy of that minion to your hand. So this has some really interesting ideas and concepts that you could use it for, and really interesting situations. However, I think that it's not a very good card. I think it's slightly below average. One, paying 5 mana to deal 4 damage is very slow. It's quite a high cost just for that damage. 2, you have to kill the minion if you're going to gain a copy of it. And 3, if you gain a copy of it, you then have to spend the mana to play that minion. And when Priest has got so many ways to take control of your opponent's minions, I'm not really sure that this is one that's good enough to see play. Now, obviously, it kind of opens up the Priest class to be able to have any minion in the game, and that obviously can create some really powerful moments. I think Rin would be a good example of one that you'd like to kill, and you can get control of that, because Priest is usually a bit of a slower deck, and they could spend the time to summon Rin and destroy your opponent's deck. So that might be a good one, but again, there are other ways that Priest can just steal Rin from your opponent when they play it anyway. So I don't really think it's a very good card at all. I might be completely wrong. There might be a specific deck that it goes in, but not one that I can see right now. Just too slow for me. Next, we're going to talk about Spectral Cutlass. It's a rogue weapon and an epic weapon at that. It costs 4 mana. It has 2 attack and 2 durability. So we talked about that earlier with the Woodcutter's Axe being okay, but that was a 2 mana card. This is a 4 mana card. So it does have some effects though, which are very, very interesting. I do like the effects. It's got lifesteal, so that's really important in rogue actually. And it also has the effect of if you play a card from another class, you then gain +1 durability. So that's not a very difficult thing for rogue to do. Historically, they've had so many cards to be able to generate cards from your opponent's class. It's really not very difficult. However, you are spending 4 mana just to get a 2/2 weapon initially. So this, to me, seems like a card that will go into a very specific deck, because 1, you will want to run the weapon buff cards, which often go into the Kingsbane deck. And 2, you'll want to be running all of the cards that generate extra cards from your opponent. Let's just say you can manage to generate 5 different cards, then that becomes a 7/2 weapon. You've got to be able to play those different cards and also play them in conjunction of the weapon buff cards to increase the attack. So it's going to be quite a difficult thing to get to work. I think it'd be a really interesting deck to try and build and to play and try and work. It's just going to be very specific and not one which I think is going to be very easy. The problem with relying on random cards from your opponent's class is that they are random, so you can't really plan how much mana they cost, etc. So it can be really difficult. A fun new card to try, but I just don't see it being better than Kingsbane. I think Kingsbane does the same stuff better. Now we're going to take a look at a card from the Shaman class. It's called Bog Shaper. 7 mana it costs. It has 4 attack and 8 health. So the attack's quite weak. The health's okay. It's an elemental, which can be important, but the effect is whenever you cast a spell, draw a minion from your deck. Now this is quite an interesting card, because drawing minions from your deck, we've seen this with Elven Minstrel, is really strong. It's good to be able to draw specific cards from your deck, and I do quite like that effect. It also combines with Hagatha the Witch, because you need to play a minion to then generate the random shaman spell to your hand. So playing the Bog Shaper with Hagatha the Witch already equipped, it then does create these combos where you can create that kind of deck. It's very slow because it costs 7 mana. It's fairly weak in stats, and because you've only got 3 mana left over that turn, it's going to be very difficult to play lots of other shaman spells to get some value from this. However, if you do have this on the board, you can create some really strong kind of miracle turns. If you've got Unstable Evolution, that is a spell, and every time you play Unstable Evolution, you'll draw another minion from your deck. So that can really help you to fill your hand back up. And if you're playing Hagatha the Witch, then you're getting even more shaman spells as well. So I think it's quite fun. I think this will be a good fun deck to try. I'm just worried about how slow it might be, and whether or not you'd actually need to put Bog Shaper into your deck. Moving on now to the Warlock class, we have the Blood Witch. This is a rare minion. It costs 4 mana, has 3 attack and 6 health, which isn't fantastic stats. It's fairly average, really. But at the start of your turn, you deal 1 damage to your hero. So that's a pretty huge downside of playing a 4-mana card that does 1 damage to your hero at the start of your turn and every turn that is there. The benefits of this card, though, are that we've seen before with their Spellstone, for example, that dealing damage to themselves can actually upgrade other cards, which can be really, really powerful. So that kind of effect works really well. The problem is that you don't get a guaranteed deal 1 damage to your face, because if your opponent moves it on the next turn, you won't get it. And also the other problem is that you take 1 damage to your face, which Warlock, sometimes if you put too many of these cards in, you can drop way down low in the health scale and it's too easy for your opponents to kill you. That's why cards such as Dark Pact are so important, but you wouldn't want to use this minion as 1 to Dark Pact because it costs 4 mana. The other thing is that the card Lesser Myth Spellstone really was very strong, and being able to upgrade it was really, really good. But Warlock managed to do it. They didn't need any extra cards. So Kobold Librarian and Hellfire were perfectly enough to go into a deck to upgrade these. So I'm not really sure they need these extra cards. Potentially there will be more cards which benefit from this, and if there is a big kind of deck that can try with Warlock, maybe you would play Blood Witch. But outside of it, I don't think this card fits into any of the decks right now. Warlock doesn't need this card. It's a bit below average, and I think the benefits from it already does. So moving on from that previous card, we have another Warlock card called the Death Web Spider, and one that does synergize with it. It costs 5 mana, 4 attack, 6 health, and is a beast. It's epic, and it has the battle cry of your hero took damage this turn, gain lifesteal. Now, there are a few things about this card which don't make it very good in my opinion. I think the lifesteal is excellent in Warlock, but you are only getting 4 lifesteal. It does have 6 health, so you might be able to get this effect off twice, which is great. But the problem is that it's a conditional lifesteal, so you have to have taken damage this turn. So effectively it means you have to have Blood Witch still on the board to have done 1 damage to you to play this on turn 5, because you can't life tap on turn 5 and play this. You'd have to play on turn 7, and then you're just playing a 5-mana card on turn 7, which isn't always great. You could potentially play it with Kobold Librarian, but then that's on turn 6. So the fact that it's conditional means that sometimes you'll just be playing a 5-mana 4/6, which isn't really that great at all. So I don't really think, again, like I said with the previous card, I don't think Warlock really needs this at the moment. They've already got the Q block, which is a very strong deck. I'm not sure this is something that would take a place in that deck or even make you want to play a different type of deck. And another card which synergizes with that is the Dusk Bat. This is Warlock, a common card this time, which costs 3 mana. It has 2 attack and 4 health, is a beast, so 3 mana, 2/4 is pretty average. But it does have the battle cry. If your hero took damage this turn, summon 2 1/1 bats. So suddenly you're paying a 3 mana 6/4, which is really strong in terms of stats. The problem is you do have to have damage taken to you that turn. So these aren't ones where you just take, like the Spellstone, if you have it in your hand while you take damage, it's permanently upgraded. These last 2 cards do actually have to be on the same turn that you take the damage. So effectively you can't play this on turn 3 unless you use the coin and play it with Kobold Librarian, for example. If you could play this on turn 3 and get the 1/1 bats out as well, then it really does create some really strong plays. But it looks like the sort of card you're going to have to wait until turn 4 to play or use your coin. So to be honest, I think this card is fairly average. I think the last 3 cards do have these interesting mechanics. I think they fit well into the Warlock theme, but not cards which I really think are good enough to squeeze into a Warlock deck at the moment, unfortunately. Next up we have a 4-mana Hunter card. It's common and it's called Dire Frenzy. Now this is a spell that gives a beast +3/+3, and it also shuffles 3 copies of that beast into your deck, which also have +3/+3. So when you draw them, they'll have +3/+3 in stats. So what you're getting here is you're getting, for 4 mana, you're getting 12/12 in stats. So that is really strong. That is a really strong play. There is an issue with it, and that is, of course, you're not getting the 9/9 of stats until later on in the game, because you then have to draw the minions again. They get shuffled into your deck and you don't know when you're going to draw them. So the problem with Hunter often has been card draw. So Hunters don't often want the game to go late game because they want to kill your opponent quickly. You want to gain control of the board and just wear your opponent down. usually when it goes to late game, you will lose to a control deck. However, if you can manage to make a deck which does go late game, then this is really strong. I also see potential for this in the Quest Hunter, because if you play your quest and you complete it, you play Carnessus Brood onto the board, one of them, then you can suddenly shuffle 3 more into your deck, which have +3/+3, and when you play them, they'll draw a card as well, so you can draw quite quickly through your deck. So I think Dire Frenzy is a cool card, and one which you won't want to play in every deck. It's not a typical Hunter card, I don't think. This is taking Hunter in a slightly different direction, but if you play it and you manage to draw 1 or maybe even 2 of those beasts, then it's worth it. So I'm looking forward to trying this card out on some Hunter decks. Next up, we have a common neutral minion. This costs 4 mana, has 2 attacks, 6 health. It's called Swift Messenger. It also has Rush, which is the new keyword, and each turn this is in your hand, it swaps its attack and health. So I've spoken before about I don't really like these swapping attack and health cards, because you can only play them on every other turn, really, because you don't want to be playing a 4 mana 2/6 with Rush. I mean, in some instances you will. If you're playing an aggro deck, potentially it is good to play as a 2/6 because you can potentially trade it in over a few turns. But where this card I think is probably one of the better swap minions that I've seen is because you can play it as a 4 mana 6 attack and 2 health, which effectively is play 4 mana, deal 6 damage to a minion, which in Mage is a Fireball, and Fireball is a really, really strong card. Obviously that's probably better because you can go hit your opponent's face with it, but being able to deal 6 damage to a minion for 4 mana is not something that is can be underestimated, actually, I don't think. It can also be buffed, so we have seen Warrior does have the Woodcutter's Axe that could buff it, which instantly makes it better. And also, it could be played in a Lady in White deck, so suddenly it becomes a 6/6 for 4 mana. But I need to, before I make my mind up on these Rush and also these swap minions, I think they really need some play testing, because it can be, I imagine it's going to be really frustrating to get to turn 4 and have the stats the wrong way round and not be able to play it till turn 5, when potentially you'll have another card to play. So I'm not a big fan of these. I quite like the idea of it, and maybe it will be fun to see it working, but when you've got your hand and you're trying to plan a turn, if something's just not right, then it can be really frustrating. So let's see how these ones turn out when we play test them. Next up, we have another swap minion. This is a common neutral card. It costs 2 mana, has 1 attack and 4 health. It's called Spell Shifter, and it has spell damage +1, which is really interesting. It's being a neutral minion and being able to put spell damage into every single class can be really good. It's a strong way for each class to get extra spell damage. But each turn this is in your hand, swap its attack and health. It's another swap minion. This is one where for 2 mana playing a 4/1 minion could be good. There was a card in the game called Delirium Mage which was exactly the same but without the swap mechanic, and it cost 3 mana. That was never seen play because for 3 mana playing a 4/1 isn't good. For 2 mana though, playing a 4/1 is pretty strong, and also having the extra spell damage is quite nice too. This is a card though that doesn't have Rush that we've seen in some of the other swap minions, so you won't really want to play this as a 1/4. So this is one that you really have to play as a 4/1, so it kind of makes it unplayable when it's switched the other way around, in my opinion. If it has Rush and you have the extra attack, then great, because you can trade it when you and do that damage. However, if it doesn't have Rush, then your opponent can just trade a 1/1 into it or just kill it with a cheap spell. So this card has its downsides, but the stats I think are strong enough, and the effect of the spell damage, that if you can play it as a 4/1, then great. It also works well in a Lady in White deck, so if you can play Lady in White and then you're playing a 2 mana 4/4, which is one of the strongest 2 manas you can play in the game, which is called Millhouse Manastorm, but you can't play Lady in White before turn 2, obviously. So it's one that you're going to be playing as a 2 mana 4/4 in the late game. So I think out of most of the swap minions, this one's okay. And if you can find a deck which can benefit from the spell damage, then I think it will probably see some play. Next, we've got another neutral card. This one is rare. and it costs 8 mana. It's called Gillian Royal Guard. It has 3 attack and 8 health. It has Divine Shield and Rush, so 2 pretty decent combos. To be able to have Divine Shield and Rush is an excellent combination. But each turn it's in your hand, it swaps the attack and health. So I don't think you're ever going to be wanting to play 8 mana to play a 3/8 onto the board. That late in the game, it just doesn't seem strong enough. Of course, there might be other ways that you can buff the minion to make it good. I already talked about Lady in White. Well, then you've got an 8/8 with Rush and Divine Shield, which makes it massive. Also, in its condition that it is as a 3/8, it will come out with Master Oakenheart, potentially. So then that is a really cool card to work with Master Oakenheart. But if you do get it on just a standard in your hand, it has you get it on the turn when it has 8 attack and 3 health, then yes, it works quite well to be able to trade it into a Lich King, for example, and then you still have an 8 attack 3 health minion on the board. So this one definitely needs some experimentation. I like the idea of playing it with Master Oakenheart. Obviously it works well in Lady in White. It is very expensive though, so let's see how that one turns out. Finally for today, we're going to end on a little bit of a high. This is a card that I really like called Dollmaster Dorian. It's a legendary neutral minion, so it can be played across all the classes. It costs 5 mana, has 2 attack and 6 health, so weak stats, but it has a really cool effect of whenever you draw a minion, summon a 1/1 copy of it. So this instantly, you can think, oh, we'll put it into a deck that draws a lot of cards. So if you put it into Miracle Rogue, for example, it wouldn't really be that good. It could be good, but Miracle Rogue tends to want to draw lots of spells so they can keep their miracle turns going. So it doesn't necessarily fit into that deck. Maybe if you draw Malagos, for example, and have a 1/1 Malagos and keep doing your spells, that's great. However, where I think this card would work really well, and I'm kind of theory crafting in my head, is with the Hagatha the Witch deck. So if you've got Bog Shaper on the board, then you play Dollmaster Dorian, then you can play Unstable Evolution 5 times if you've got another minion to do that on. Each time you play Unstable Evolution, the Bog Shaper will draw another minion, which summons a minion for you, and it will summon a 1/1 copy of that minion. But then you can Unstable Evolution that. So let's say it was a Lich King, a 1/1 copy of Lich King, you could Unstable Evolution it into a 9-drop and then a 10-drop, for example. So that then all of a sudden could give you a big board of some really cool, strong minions. So I quite like this card. And each time you play it, Hagatha the Witch would then be drawing you a random shaman spell to be able to play. So this card is really cool. I think I'll need to do some more thinking about what other classes you could put it in. It's not one that's going to be 100% reliable because you never know what minions you're going to draw from your deck. But being able to play it with Bog Shaper means that you're guaranteed to draw a minion. So, and you could also combo it with Elven Minstrel in the Rogue class, for example. Play this plus Elven Minstrel, you might be able to get 2 1/1 copies of some powerful Rogue minions. If you're playing Kingsbane, for example, and you've got the Squid Face, getting 2 1/1 copies of that is excellent because then it can upgrade your weapon. But it takes a lot of setup, so this isn't a card which I think is going to be crazy overpowered, but I think it's going to be a card that's going to be fun to play and fun to try and design a deck around. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry it was a bit longer today with all those extra cards, but I'll be returning tomorrow with a smaller video with the 4 or 5 cards that get released. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.